My name is Marilyn Johnson, but everybody in the neighborhood just calls me Mama Marilyn. I've carried that name for as long as I can remember because if you lived on my block, if you went to my church, if you ever knocked on my door in need, I was the one who would answer. That name wasn't just something folks said. It was a title I earned through years of showing up for people. And let me tell you, baby, I wore it with pride. I spent over 30 years working as a nurse. I wasn't the type to sit behind a desk. No, I was the one up all night holding hands, cleaning wounds, whispering prayers under my breath, and running on little sleep but a lot of love. My son Anthony, Lord knows, he was my reason for pushing through those long shifts. His daddy passed when he was just 8 years old, and from that moment on, it was me and him against the world. I carried that boy through school, through his growing pains, through those hungry nights when I made sure his plate was full even if mine was half empty. People don't understand what it means to sacrifice until they've looked in their child's eyes and decided, I'll go without so you don't have to. And I did just that year after year. I patched his shoes when the soles gave out. I ironed his school shirts until the collars faded. And when he got into college, I worked double shifts and sold off my jewelry just to cover what scholarships didn't. It wasn't easy. My knees were already starting to ache, my body was begging for rest, but I told myself, if Anthony makes it, if he builds a better life, then all of this was worth it. In my community, people knew me for my pies at the church bake sales, for babysitting their little ones when they needed a break, for stopping by a sick neighbor's porch with a pot of chicken soup. That was me. Giving was my nature. Respect for elders ran deep in our culture, and I gave it as much as I expected it. So when folks said, Mama Marilyn, you're the backbone of this neighborhood, I believed that maybe all my labor wasn't in vain. But time will catch you no matter how strong you've been. I hit 68 and suddenly I wasn't the same woman moving swiftly down the hospital halls. Arthritis set fire in my knees. A mild stroke left me slower than I used to be. Prideful as I was, I had to face the truth. Living alone wasn't safe anymore. That's when Anthony said, Mama, come live with us. You don't need to struggle by yourself. At the time, I thanked God for giving me a son who cared enough to take me in. So I packed up my little house. That old place held decades of memories, but I told myself family mattered more than four walls. I moved into their suburban home, quiet neighborhood, trimmed lawns, houses close enough where neighbors could see you coming and going. I brought my pension check with me, every month putting it toward the bills. I did the laundry when I could, cooked when my hands weren't trembling, and still tried to make myself useful, because I never wanted to feel like a burden. But here's the thing. When you've spent your whole life giving, you don't expect to walk into a home and feel like you've overstayed your welcome before you've even unpacked your bags. I tried to brush it off at first. The tight smiles, the little sighs, the we'll manage when I offered help. But deep down I told myself, no matter what, hold your head high. I had been a nurse, a mother, a neighbor, a giver all my life. I had dignity. I had history. And even if my body wasn't as strong, my spirit was not weak. That's where my story begins. A woman who gave everything, who earned respect with sweat and sacrifice, stepping into what she thought was a new season of love and care. But sometimes, baby, life will show you that even the people you raised can forget the very hands that fed them. Living in Anthony's house should have felt like an extension of home, but it didn't take long before I started to notice the cracks. Small things at first, nothing loud or dramatic, just those little shifts in air that only a woman of my age can catch. You know how sometimes silence tells you more than words ever will? That's what I began to live with. Vanessa, my daughter-in-law, is the type who likes things neat, orderly, and under her control. And to her, I was one more thing in that house she couldn't control. My mornings always started with prayer and a little gospel music humming through the radio. That's how I centered myself. the way I'd done for decades. But more than once, I caught Vanessa rolling her eyes as she walked past the kitchen, muttering about, "Too much noise this early." One morning she even reached over and turned the radio down low, saying the kids needed quiet. I smiled and let it go, but inside I felt the sting. Was a soft hymn too much for her spirit? Or was it just me she didn't want to hear? The grandbabies, Lord, they were my sunshine. My grandson would come running into my lap after school, and my granddaughter loved for me to braid her little pigtails while I told her Bible stories. But slowly I noticed less of that. Vanessa started saying things like, "Don't bother Grandma too much, she's tired," or "Go play upstairs, don't crowd her space." But I knew it wasn't about giving me rest. It was about creating distance. I saw it in the way she shot me a look when the kids were too cozy in my lap. Children can sense that kind of tension. Before long, they hesitated, unsure if loving their grandma out loud would cause another sigh from their mother. That cut me deeper than anything, watching innocent love get caught in grown folks' bitterness. Then there were my hands. Arthritis made them tremble sometimes, especially when I tried to help with dishes or folding laundry. Once, while drying a plate, it slipped and chipped on the counter. I bent down, knees aching, trying to clean it quick, but I heard Vanessa behind me. "See, this is what I'm talking about," she whispered under her breath. Not loud enough for Anthony to scold her, but sharp enough for me to hear. I swallowed hard, pretending I hadn't. Anthony, my son. I kept waiting for him to notice, to step in with more than just half-hearted words. He'd sometimes say, "Vanessa, leave Mama be," but his tone lacked weight. He never put his foot down. He was caught between his wife's sharp edges and my quiet endurance. And instead of choosing to protect the woman who raised him, he often chose silence. That silence was a wound all on its own. Meals around the table told their own story. I'd cook when I had the strength. Collard greens, cornbread, baked chicken, the food Anthony grew up on. He'd eat it with a smile, even ask for seconds, but Vanessa would push her plate slow, picking at it like it was never to her taste. The next night she'd order takeout, insisting the kids wanted pizza instead. Nobody said it outright, but the message was clear. Your way isn't wanted here. Now don't get me wrong, nothing had exploded yet. There was no shouting, no front yard scenes, not then. But a storm doesn't start with thunder. It starts with the air turning heavy, with clouds creeping slow across the sky. That's what life under that roof felt like. Small sighs, rolled eyes, muttered words, shifting glances. My spirit was picking up every signal. Still I held my tongue. I told myself, "You're here to help, not to make waves." I clung to dignity, even as the warmth around me cooled day by day. I had lived through worse in life, and I thought maybe patience could bridge the gap. But looking back, those early household frictions were the cracks in the foundation. And everybody knows once a foundation weakens, it's only a matter of time before the whole house starts to shake. It was late one evening, after supper had been cleared and the children tucked into bed. My knees were throbbing from standing too long at the sink, so I eased myself into the hallway chair with a folded towel in my hands, listening to the hum of the dishwasher. The house was quiet, except for the muffled voices slipping through Anthony and Vanessa's bedroom door down the hall. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but when your hearing sharpens with age and your heart's already heavy, sometimes words find you whether you want them or not. Vanessa's voice cut through the silence first. Sharp, irritated. "I can't keep doing this, Anthony. Your mother is turning our house into a nursing home. Everything revolves around her needs, her pills, her appointments, her clumsy hands. I did not sign up for this." I froze, gripping that towel tight. My chest felt like it had been pressed against a stone. Anthony mumbled something low, too soft for me to catch at first. Then Vanessa's tone rose, slicing clear. She is dead weight, Anthony. Vic, you know it. She's dragging us down financially, emotionally, everything. We could be saving, planning trips, living our lives, but no. We're stuck babysitting your mother like she's another child. Dead weight. The words pierced me like a knife turned slow. I sat still, not daring to breathe, my ears burning hot. Dead weight. That's what I had become to her. A burden, a problem to be moved, a stone tied to their ankles. And my own son, my Anthony. I waited for him to push back, to say something, anything. I wanted to hear him tell her no, that I wasn't some load they were chained to. But his voice came soft, defeated. Vanessa, please. Don't say it like that. That was it. Not a defense, not a stand. Just a whisper of protest swallowed by her louder fury. You know I'm right, she shot back. You're too scared to admit it, but you feel it too. And silence followed. His silence. I sat in that hallway like stone, the towel trembling in my lap, tears rolling down without permission. That was the moment the air changed for me. I had sacrificed everything for that boy. Skipped meals so he could eat, worked sick so he could graduate, gone without so he could thrive. And in return, the wife he chose had the gall to call me dead weight. Worse, my son didn't stand between me and that insult. It wasn't just the words. It was the silence that followed. Silence speaks, baby. And that night, it told me loud and clear. The boy I raised, the man I thought would defend me, had chosen to protect his peace over his mother's dignity. I cried quietly, not wanting them to hear. But in those tears, something inside me shifted. My view of Anthony tilted, cracked in a way I couldn't piece back together. He was still my son, but the loyalty I thought was unshakable had shown its first fracture. And once a fracture shows, no matter how much you patch it, you'll always see the line. The envelope came in the mail on a Wednesday afternoon. I knew the weight of it before it was even opened. The hospital logo stamped in the corner, the thick paper inside. It was the bill from my last hospital stay, the stroke that nearly took me months earlier. I sat at the table, smoothing the envelope flat with trembling fingers, already ashamed that my name carried another burden into this household. When Anthony came home from work, he dropped his briefcase by the door, loosened his tie, and gave me that distracted smile he'd perfected, the kind that said he was here, but his mind was somewhere else. I slid the envelope toward him. This came today. He opened it, eyes scanning the numbers, and I watched his whole body tighten. $700, he muttered under his breath. He rubbed his forehead, already weary. Before I could even explain that I'd planned to contribute, Vanessa breezed in from the kitchen, heels clicking on the tile. What now? She asked, snatching the paper from his hands. Her eyes darted over the total and then rolled so hard you'd think she could see behind her head. Unbelievable. Every time I think we're getting ahead, here comes another one of her problems. Her words slapped me before I could brace myself. Her problems. As if my body failing me had been a choice. As if years of working double shifts hadn't worn these bones down. I can cover part of it, I said softly, reaching for my purse. I still have a little in savings. Maybe 300 I can. But Vanessa cut me off with a bitter laugh. 300. That won't even scratch it. What were you thinking, not having decent insurance? Honestly, it's irresponsible. She folded her arms, lips pressed tight, glaring like I'd brought the stroke on just to inconvenience her. Anthony sat there, staring at the bill in his hands. His silence louder than her accusations. I looked at him, hoping he'd say something. Anything to remind me I wasn't just a walking expense in my own child's home. But he kept his eyes down, shame written across his face, though his mouth stayed shut. That silence dug deeper than Vanessa's words. "I didn't want to be a burden," I whispered, my voice shaking. "I thought moving in would help, not hurt." Vanessa sighed dramatically, as if I were draining the last drop of patience from her. "Look, we can't keep bleeding money like this. Every time we try to plan something, a vacation, saving for the kids' future, it gets derailed. We're young, Anthony. We should be living, not drowning in medical bills." Young. Living. As if my presence was robbing them of the life they deserved. I folded my hands tight in my lap, ashamed that my illness, my frailty, had become a line item on their financial struggles. My savings, those few dollars I'd put aside from years of sacrifice, meant nothing in her eyes. To her, I wasn't Mama Marilyn, the woman who raised her husband, the grandmother who braided her daughter's hair. I was an expense, an error in their budget. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, hearing muffled arguments through the walls. Vanessa's sharp words, Anthony's tired voice, neither of them lowering their tones enough to hide that I was the subject. The shame sat heavy on my chest, thicker than the stroke ever did. And I knew then, in this house, money wasn't just money. It was the weapon Vanessa used to cut me down, and the excuse Anthony used to stay silent. It was a Sunday afternoon, sunlight pouring down on that quiet suburban street, the kind of day where neighbors mow lawns and children ride bikes. We had just come back from church, Pastor Elijah preaching about honoring your parents, a sermon that stirred something in me but seemed to bounce right off Anthony and Vanessa. By the time we got home, the peace was already thin. I was in the driveway, moving slow with my cane, when Vanessa's sharp voice rang out. "Look at this mess. That old car is leaking oil all over the driveway." She pointed down at the dark stain beneath my Buick, her face twisted like it was a personal attack. I tried to steady my voice. "I'll take it to the mechanic this week, when I can manage." "When?" she snapped, cutting me off. "You can't afford it, and we sure can't. I am tired of watching everything in this house fall apart because of you." Anthony came out behind her, hands raised as if to calm her down. "Vanessa." But she was already on a roll. "No, Anthony, enough is enough. We can't save money, we can't have privacy, the kids tiptoe around in their own home. And now the driveway's ruined too. All because your mother is here. I'm done." The words stung, but what crushed me was watching my son freeze, caught between his wife's fire and his mother's tears. I looked at him, my eyes begging, pleading for him to defend me. "Anthony," I whispered, voice trembling, "how can you let her talk to me like this? I raised you better." For a moment, I thought I saw the boy I raised flicker behind his eyes, but then it was gone. His face hardened, cold. "Ma," he said slowly, "maybe it's time. Maybe you'd be happier somewhere else, where you can get the care you need. We can't do this anymore." My knees nearly buckled. Happier somewhere else. The son I'd sacrificed for, the child I carried and protected, was standing there in broad daylight telling me I no longer had a home with him. "I have nowhere else," I cried, voice breaking. "I thought I was family." Vanessa folded her arms tight, her glare like a knife. "We'll find you a home, but you can't stay here. I won't let you drag us down any longer." I turned toward the house, desperate, but Vanessa was already tossing my suitcase onto the porch. A neighbor across the street stopped watering his lawn, eyes wide. Mrs. Green next door peeked over the hedge, her mouth falling open as she watched. Shame burned hotter than the sun overhead. I tried to gather my things, tears streaming so heavy I could barely see. "Son, please." My voice cracked under the weight of heartbreak. Anthony stood still, his hands shoved in his pockets, eyes locked on the ground. "I'm sorry, Ma," he muttered. But he didn't stop it. He didn't move. The sound of a window opening pulled my eyes upward. My grandson leaned out, his little voice carrying across the yard. "Grandma, are you leaving? I love you." My heart shattered all over again. "I love you too, baby," I called back through tears. "Be good now." Vanessa yanked him back inside, snapping for him to close the window. And there I was, a 68-year-old woman standing on the sidewalk with my suitcase in hand, thrown out like trash in front of neighbors who shook their heads in disbelief. Mrs. Green came rushing over, wrapping her arm around me, scolding Anthony and Vanessa. "Have you no shame? That's your mother." But the front door slammed shut, curtains drawn. I packed my trembling body into that old Buick, the oil stain still glistening beneath it, and drove off. My vision blurred with tears, my chest heaving with sobs I couldn't hold in. The street, the houses, the life I thought I belonged to disappeared in my rearview mirror. That was the day I learned betrayal has a sound, the slam of your own child's front door closing in your face. That Buick had carried me through decades, trips to work, grocery runs, late-night drives to the ER when Anthony was a child with fever. It wasn't much to look at anymore, faded paint, a weary engine, but it was all I had left when I pulled away from that house. By the time I reached the church parking lot, the street lamps had flickered on, casting pale light across the empty asphalt. That old sanctuary, where I had sung hymns and knelt in prayer for years, felt like the only place left that wouldn't turn me away. I cut the engine and sat there in the dark, the tick of cooling metal loud against the silence. My hands gripped the steering wheel until the tremors in my fingers turned into sobs that shook my whole body. Never in my life had I imagined ending a Sunday like this. Not with a warm dinner table, not with family laughter, but with a suitcase on the back seat and shame heavy on my chest. I leaned my head back against the torn fabric of the headrest, staring up at the roof of the car. The tears wouldn't stop. They flowed hot, one after the other, as I whispered into the emptiness. "Lord, what did I do so wrong? How did I become nothing in the eyes of my own child?" The echo of Vanessa's words, dead weight, repeated in my ears like a curse, and Anthony's silence, that cut even deeper. The cold crept in through the windows as night thickened. My knees ached from the damp air, but I pulled my coat tighter and told myself to endure. I didn't dare drive anywhere else. Where would I go? Who would take me in now, when even my own son had turned me out? The thought of knocking on a neighbor's door, pride stripped and dignity lost, made me sink lower in that seat. I'd rather endure this cold car than beg again. At one point I looked toward the church doors, hoping maybe someone might appear. A janitor, a deacon locking up late, but no one came. Just me, parked in the shadow of a place that had once felt like family. I thought of the pew where I always sat, of the altar I'd stood at when Anthony was baptized, of the countless prayers I had lifted inside those walls. And there I was, locked outside with only the hum of the streetlight for company. Every creak of the car, every rustle of wind, made me feel smaller, weaker. I was no longer Mama Marilyn to anyone. I was just an old woman in a parking lot, invisible to the world. My stomach growled. I'd left without eating, but I couldn't bring myself to move. My pride wouldn't let me walk into a corner store, not with my face swollen from crying. The hours crawled. Midnight came, then 1, then 2. I dozed off in fits, waking every time my head jerked against the window. Each time I woke, panic washed over me. What if someone tapped the glass? What if someone saw me like this? The thought of being discovered in this state, humiliated all over again, sent fresh tears spilling. Somewhere around dawn, as the first hint of gray light touched the horizon, I pressed my forehead against the steering wheel and let the sobs rack me until I had no strength left. My spirit felt hollow. Betrayal has a way of emptying you out, draining even the little hope you try to cling to. That night, I realized loneliness is not just being alone. It's being unwanted. When the church bell finally tolled the hour, I sat up, wiping my face with trembling hands. The sun was rising on a new day, but I didn't feel new at all. I felt discarded. I felt invisible. I felt like the whole world had passed me by and left me sitting in a broken Buick, parked in the lot of the very place where I had once felt most at home. That was my lowest point. My spirit was cracked, my dignity stripped, my body cold. All I had left was breath in my lungs. And even that, in those moments, felt like too much to carry. Morning light broke across the church parking lot, thin and pale, when I finally stirred from a restless doze in the front seat of my Buick. My back was stiff, my knees throbbing from the cramped position. I sat up, rubbing my eyes, ashamed that daylight would reveal the truth. A woman who had given everything now reduced to sleeping in her car like she had no place in the world. That's when I heard a familiar voice. Lord have mercy. Marilyn. I looked up and there she was. Gloria Anderson, standing beside my car, eyes wide with shock and burning with the kind of fire only a true friend carries. Gloria wasn't just a church sister. She was my confidant, my rock in times when life had knocked me flat. 70 years old but still walking strong. She had a sharp tongue when needed and a heart big enough to wrap around anybody hurting. She yanked open the passenger door before I could protest. What in God's name are you doing out here? In your car. All night. I tried to gather myself, wiping at my swollen eyes. I didn't want to trouble nobody. My voice cracked, small and brittle. Her face hardened, but not at me. Don't you dare say that. You've spent your whole life pouring into people. Into me, into this community, into that ungrateful son of yours. And now you think you're a burden. Absolutely not. Get your things. You're coming with me. Tears welled up again. Not from sorrow this time, but from the shock of someone refusing to let me fall any further. Gloria, I don't want to impose. She cut me off with a glare that could stop a grown man mid-sentence. Impose. Girl, please. You raised that boy, you held this community together with your bare hands, and they had the nerve to toss you aside. No, ma'am. You're not sleeping in no car while I've got a roof over my head. Not on my watch. I sat there frozen for a moment, pride wrestling with exhaustion. But when she reached over, patting my trembling hand, her voice softened. Marilyn, family isn't always blood. Sometimes family is the one who shows up when the whole world turns its back. And right now you've got family right here. Something inside me cracked open. After a night of cold silence, her words felt like balm on raw wounds. I nodded, unable to speak, and gathered my small suitcase from the back seat. Gloria took it from me like it weighed nothing. We drove the short distance to her house in silence, but it wasn't the crushing silence I'd felt the night before. It was the kind of quiet that holds space for healing. When she led me into her cozy kitchen, the smell of fresh coffee and fried bacon filled the air. She set a plate in front of me, piled high like she'd been expecting company all along. Eat, she said firmly. As I sat at her table, fork trembling in my hand, the tears started again. I don't know what I did to deserve this, I whispered. Gloria leaned forward, her eyes locked on mine, strong and unyielding. You didn't do anything to deserve it. They did wrong. And mark my words, they'll have to answer for it. Her outrage was fierce, and for the first time since being pushed out of Anthony's house, I felt something stir in me. Small, fragile, but alive. Flicker. Maybe it was anger, maybe it was dignity clawing its way back. Maybe it was just the reminder that I wasn't alone. Whatever it was, it lit a spark deep in my chest. I sat there, clutching my coffee mug, still wounded but no longer empty. Gloria had thrown me a lifeline, and I was beginning to realize, maybe my story wasn't over. That first night under Gloria's roof, I slept in a real bed again. Not my own, but one dressed with clean sheets, soft pillows, and dignity. When I woke the next morning, sunlight streamed through lace curtains, and for the first time in days I didn't feel like a piece of trash thrown out onto the street. Still, the ache lingered. My son's betrayal hadn't been a bad dream. It was my reality. Gloria wouldn't let me sit in silence. She bustled about her kitchen, pouring coffee, fussing at me like only an old friend can. "Eat, Marilyn. Don't just sit there looking pitiful. You need strength." Her words were sharp, but her eyes were kind. She wasn't about to let me wither away under shame. When I tried to protest, telling her I didn't want to be a burden, she slammed her hand on the table so hard the spoon rattled. "Burden? That woman, your daughter-in-law, put that poison in your head. You carried your son for 9 months, raised him with your sweat and sacrifice. If anybody owes, it's them. Not you." Her anger was righteous, and sitting there listening, I felt a strange warmth stir in me. It was the first spark of something other than sorrow, a quiet ember of indignation. Later that week, Pastor Elijah stopped by. He had heard whispers of what happened, and though his face was gentle, I could see the disappointment behind his eyes. He clasped my hands, weathered like his own, and said, "Sister Marilyn, sometimes when people turn their back on what's right, God allows them to walk into darkness until they stumble. But sometimes, He uses us to light the lantern that shows them just how far they've fallen." I nodded, tears stinging my eyes. "Pastor, I don't want revenge. I want them to understand the pain they caused. I want them to feel what it means to be cast aside." Gloria leaned forward, fire in her voice. "Then let's make them feel it. Not with fists or fury, but with something they can't shake off. Shame. Fear. The same emptiness they left you sitting with in that car." The three of us sat there, sipping coffee, and it was as if the weight in my chest began to shift. I had been broken, yes, but broken things can be sharpened too. I thought of Anthony's silence, of Vanessa's sneer, of my grandbaby's little voice crying out the window, "Grandma, are you leaving?" That memory hardened into resolve. Gloria slapped the table again. "We're not going to hurt them, Marilyn. We're going to teach them. You hear me? They're going to learn respect if it's the last thing I do." For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine it. Not lying down in despair, but standing up with dignity, even if my body was weak. I would not strike them with hands, but with lessons that cut deeper than any blow. Psychological, spiritual, a reminder of who I was and what they owed me. I looked at Gloria, then at Pastor Elijah, and finally at my own trembling hands. And I whispered, steady this time, "Yes, they need to learn." It was in that moment, in that warm kitchen filled with coffee and conviction, that my tears dried. The broken mother who had driven away sobbing began to fade. In her place rose something new, a woman determined not to destroy, but to make her son and his wife face the truth they tried to bury. The birth of my transformation was quiet, but it was real. And once that decision rooted in me, there was no turning back. By midweek, folks were telling me everything, from the school drop-off whispers to how his co-workers went cold. In a neighborhood like ours, news travels faster than wind. It didn't take 2 days after I was cast out for whispers to ripple down sidewalks and pews. Mrs. Green, who'd seen me standing on the porch with my bags, wasted no time telling anyone who would listen. And once her tongue loosened, the story grew legs. By the weekend, everybody in our community had an opinion about the Johnsons. It started small murmurs at the grocery store when Vanessa walked through with the children, hushed voices asking, "Isn't that the woman who put her husband's mama out?" She'd feel the stares even when no one dared say it loud. Mothers who once greeted her warm now gave her cold nods, pulling their carts the other way. At school drop-off, the sting was sharper. A group of parents clustered together, their eyes trailing Anthony as he walked his son to class. No words were needed, just the way conversations fell silent when he passed by, only to pick up again once he was out of earshot. One bold woman finally said what others were thinking. "If he can turn his back on his own mother, what kind of example is that for the kids?" Anthony kept his head down, but the words followed him like a shadow. At his office, it wasn't any better. Colleagues who had once joked with him in the break room now greeted him with stiff politeness. One man, an elder in our church, barely disguised his disdain. "You know, Anthony," he said one morning, "if a man can't honor his mother, how's he supposed to honor his clients?" Anthony laughed it off weakly, but the jab landed hard. His charm, the very thing he built his career on, was slipping through his fingers under the weight of judgment. Vanessa's troubles deepened at church. She arrived one Sunday, chin high, heels sharp, trying to act untouched by the whispers. But as she slid into her usual pew, heads turned. A church mother leaned across the aisle and hissed, "Shame on you." The words hit like stones. During fellowship, where once she was surrounded by chatter, she found herself standing alone, clutching her purse, eyes darting for someone, anyone, to offer kindness. Phone calls began too. Not kind ones but sharp ones. One deaconess called her directly. "Vanessa, I've known Marilyn longer than you've been alive. She prayed over my children, she fed families when they had nothing. And you treat her like baggage. You better ask the Lord for forgiveness before he shows you what real burdens feel like." Vanessa hung up, shaking, but the condemnation gnawed at her. The weight pressed in from every side. Home, the arguments grew more frequent. "They're all turning on us," Vanessa hissed at Anthony one evening. "You let this get out. You let your mother control the narrative." Anthony snapped back. "Don't blame me, you're the one who kept pushing." But deep down he knew the truth. It wasn't just gossip. It was the community's moral compass, and it was pointed squarely against them. In neighborhoods like ours, reputation is currency. And the Johnsons, once seen as a respectable young family, were suddenly bankrupt in the eyes of their peers. Cold stares replaced warm greetings. Whispers replaced handshakes, shame replaced pride. And for Anthony and Vanessa, the walls of their perfect suburban life began to feel smaller, tighter, like every door they walked through carried the question unspoken but heavy in the air. How could you do your own mother like that? Guilt has a way of creeping into a man's bones, no matter how much he tries to cover it with work or routine. For Anthony, it started with the silence. My phone rang late one evening, his name glowing on the screen, but I let it buzz until it went dark. Then it rang again, and again. I sat at Gloria's kitchen table, staring at it, my finger hovering but never pressing answer. Gloria watched me closely, saying nothing. She knew what I was doing, letting him stew in the very emptiness he'd left me in. By the third night, Anthony was calling over and over. Each time my voicemail picked up, his chest tightened. He left messages, his voice low, strained. "Ma, it's me. Just checking on you. Call me back, please." The next night, "I don't know where you are. Just let me know you're safe." His words trailed off into sighs, guilt heavy in every pause. But the line stayed cold. At work, his mind slipped. He sat at his desk, staring at client files, but instead of numbers and contracts, he saw me, hunched in my car, clutching that suitcase, my face wet with tears. He shook his head, trying to shove the image away, but it followed him into every quiet moment. One night he woke in a sweat, heart racing. In his dream, I was wandering the streets in the dark, cane clutched tight, cars whizzing past as I stumbled. He reached for me in the dream, calling out, but I kept walking, disappearing into shadows. He sat up in bed, gasping, while Vanessa stirred beside him. "Another nightmare?" she asked, annoyance in her voice. He didn't answer. He couldn't. The guilt began to eat at his body. He lost his appetite, skipped breakfast, poked at dinner. At the office, a coworker asked if he was sick. The bags under his eyes were so deep they looked carved in. He brushed it off, but inside he knew what was wrong. The silence of the one woman who had never turned her back on him. Vanessa tried to wave it away. "She's fine, Anthony. She's doing this to make you feel guilty. Stop letting her control you." But her words only stoked his unease. Because deep down he knew me better than that. I wasn't a woman to play games. If I wasn't answering, it was because I truly had nothing left to say to him. At church, he sat stiff in the pew, unable to meet Pastor Elijah's eyes. Every scripture about honoring your parents sounded like a direct arrow. He squirmed through the sermon, sweat beading on his forehead, while Vanessa sat beside him, arms crossed, pretending not to hear. But Anthony heard. He couldn't not hear. The echo of those words followed him out the doors and into his sleep. And through it all, I stayed silent. I clutched my phone sometimes, tears sliding down my face, but I never picked up. I knew the torment of not knowing if I was safe, not knowing where I was, would weigh on him heavier than any words I could speak. Silence became my weapon, and guilt became his punishment. Night after night, Anthony lay awake staring at the ceiling, Vanessa asleep beside him. His mind replayed it all, my trembling voice asking, "How can you let her talk to me like this?" The bags on the porch, my grandson crying out the window. Each memory turned sharp, slicing into his pride, until his heart carried nothing but regret. And still the phone stayed silent. It was a Tuesday evening when the package came. Nothing large, just a plain manila envelope slipped through the mail slot. No return address, no handwriting they could recognize. Anthony picked it up off the floor when he got home from work, frowning at the weightless feel of it. He carried it into the kitchen where Vanessa was preparing dinner, dropped it on the counter, and slit it open with a knife. Inside was a single photograph. Anthony's breath caught before he even realized what he was looking at. It was him, no more than 7 years old. His arms wrapped tight around my neck, grinning wide with missing front teeth. In his little hand was a paper card smeared with red and yellow paint, the Mother's Day project he had made in Sunday school. And there I was, younger then, smiling with pure joy, pride radiating across my face. The kind of photo that told a story of love so deep it couldn't be shaken. On the back, in neat, unfamiliar handwriting, were the words, "Honor thy father and thy mother, that thy days may be long upon the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee." Exodus 20 verse 12. Anthony stared at the verse until the letters blurred. His throat tightened, his chest heavy. That picture wasn't just an old memory. It was a reminder, mirror, proof of a love that once defined his life, a love he had turned his back on. His eyes burned as guilt surged through him, stronger than any sermon, sharper than any dream. "What is it?" Vanessa asked, drying her hands on a towel. She snatched the photo from him, squinting. Her face hardened. "Oh, please." Probably that nosy Mrs. Green trying to be dramatic. Who else would pull something like this? Anthony shook his head slowly, still holding the envelope. How would she even get this picture? I haven't seen it in years. His voice cracked. This was from my mother's album. I remember when she kept it on the mantel. Vanessa rolled her eyes, trying to mask her unease. Well, maybe she gave it to someone once. People in this neighborhood are always digging up dirt when they smell blood. Don't let it get to you. She tossed the photo carelessly back on the counter, as if it were nothing more than junk mail. But Anthony couldn't dismiss it. He picked it up again, his hands trembling, staring at the faces frozen in time. He remembered that day, the paint on his fingers, the way I had hugged him tight, whispering, "You're my greatest gift." Now the memory felt like a blade pressed against his heart. That night, after Vanessa went to bed, Anthony sat alone at the kitchen table, the photo in front of him. He traced the outline of his younger self with his finger, tears slipping down his cheeks. He whispered into the quiet, "Mama, I'm sorry." But the silence that followed was crushing. Upstairs, Vanessa lay awake longer than she admitted. She couldn't shake the image either. That smiling boy in his mother's arms, the verse scrawled like a judgment. She told herself it was a prank, an overblown scare tactic from the community. But deep down, she felt the unease crawling under her skin. Because if someone had gone through the trouble of digging into their past, it meant the shame wasn't going away anytime soon. That single envelope, that one photograph, was enough to turn their house heavy with ghosts. Money had always been tight for Anthony and Vanessa, but they had kept their heads just above water, convincing themselves that with time things would ease. Yet within weeks of putting me out, the walls began to close in. Anthony had been banking on a major insurance deal, the kind of contract that would have padded his commission and given them breathing room. He prepared for it, rehearsed his pitch, walked into that meeting with hope in his chest. But something shifted in the air. His client, an older man who also happened to know me from church, gave him a look that said more than words could. "I just don't know if I can trust this, Anthony," he finally said, sliding the papers back across the desk. No clear reason, no outright refusal, just a silent judgment that cut the deal short. Anthony walked out with nothing. No commission, no boost. Just the sick knowledge that the whispers about what he had done to his mother had followed him even into his work. Vanessa was hit next. She had been eyeing a branch manager promotion for months, dressing sharper, working later hours, doing everything to prove herself. But when the announcement came, her name wasn't on it. Another woman, less experienced but with a reputation for integrity, was chosen instead. Behind closed doors, one of the bank directors, a deacon at our church, had quietly said, "Character matters. Leadership isn't just numbers." Vanessa never heard those words directly, but she felt the sting in the decision. All her effort, blocked by the shadow of her own actions. At home the cracks spread wider. Without me in the house, childcare became a pressing cost. Babysitters and daycare fees ate into their budget fast, and the children, restless from the sudden shift, added to the strain. Anthony came home one evening to find Vanessa fuming over the bills. "Do you realize how much this sitter charges? And these kids keep asking for your mother, which doesn't help." Her words were sharp, but the numbers in her hand were sharper still, proof that what they once called dead weight had been carrying more of the load than they wanted to admit. Then came the pension. My small monthly contribution, the check I had quietly handed over every month to help with groceries and utilities, was suddenly missing. They hadn't noticed it when I lived there, hadn't thanked me for it, but the absence screamed louder than my presence ever had. The bills stacked higher, balances grew lower, and for the first time, they were forced to face just how much my sacrifice had been propping them up. Arguments flared. Anthony blamed Vanessa. "We wouldn't be in this mess if you hadn't pushed her out." Vanessa snapped back. "Don't you dare put this on me." "You agreed. You let it happen." Their voices rose in the night while the children cowered upstairs, listening to their perfect home crumble with every word. It was bitter irony. The woman they thought was draining them had been the very one patching the holes in their sinking ship. Without me, the truth was bare. The Johnson household wasn't thriving. It was unraveling, one unpaid bill, one lost opportunity, one restless night at a time. By the end of the month, their refrigerator hummed emptier, their savings account shrank to dust, and the resentment between them grew thick as smoke. And through it all, neither could escape the truth pressing in on them. The burden they cast out had been their backbone all along. The envelope arrived on a Friday morning, stamped from a law office downtown. Anthony had just stepped onto the porch to grab the mail, barely awake, when his eyes caught his mother's name printed neatly in the corner. His stomach tightened before he even tore it open. Inside was a letter on official letterhead, heavy with seals and signatures. He read the first line out loud in disbelief. "This is to inform you that Marilyn Johnson has executed a new last will and testament." His heart sank as his eyes scanned the page. It spelled out in plain black ink that every asset with her name attached, her modest savings account, the life insurance policy she had kept faithfully paid, even the little rental house she still owned outright, would be left to charity and to Gloria Anderson's family. Not a cent, not a scrap, would go to her son or her grandchildren. At the bottom, in language cold and final, it read, "Due to irreconcilable differences with my son Anthony Johnson, I leave him what he left me, nothing." Anthony's knees nearly gave out. The words blurred as his chest tightened. To be written off by the woman who raised him, to see her love reduced to a legal erasure, cut deeper than anything Vanessa had ever hurled at him. It wasn't about the money. It was about the finality. About his mother declaring in writing that he was no longer her heir, no longer her pride, no longer even her responsibility. He dropped the papers onto the kitchen table, his face pale, his hands trembling. Vanessa swooped in, snatching them up. Her eyes darted over the page, and her gasp turned into fury. What? She left everything to Gloria. To charity. Her voice rose into a shriek. "This is insane. She can't do this. That money, that house. It's supposed to stay in this family." Anthony rubbed his face, his voice hollow. "She doesn't see us as family anymore." Vanessa slammed the letter down, her face contorted with rage. "Oh, don't you dare pity her right now. This is spite, Anthony. Pure spite. That woman is vindictive, and she's punishing us. And you're just going to sit there like it's fine." Anthony said nothing, his silence thick, his mind spinning with memories of childhood. Birthdays she'd scraped together money for, Christmas mornings she'd made magic with barely anything in her pockets. And now she had left him nothing. Nothing. Vanessa wasn't moved by memories. She was moved by dollars. She paced the kitchen like a caged animal, ranting. "Do you understand what this means? Our children, her own grandchildren, cut out. And you just let her. You sit there and let her destroy our future." Anthony buried his head in his hands, the weight of shame pressing him down. "Vanessa, she's already destroyed. I destroyed us the day I let you push her out that door." But Vanessa wasn't listening. She was too consumed with fury over what she saw slipping away. "No," she snapped, her voice sharp as glass. "She thinks she can play games. She thinks she can humiliate us. But I'm not losing everything to Gloria Anderson and some charity fund. Over my dead body." The house grew heavy with tension, the kind of silence that follows when words strike too deep. Anthony sat crumpled at the table, staring at the letter that told him in cold legal ink that his mother had disowned him. Vanessa stood trembling with rage, already scheming, already fuming. The letter had done its work. One envelope was all it took to carve another deep crack in the Johnson household, this time not from whispers, not from bills, but from the finality of a mother's rejection written out for the world to see. The call came on a Wednesday morning. Vanessa had just dropped the kids at school when her cell phone buzzed with the branch director's number flashing across the screen. She answered with her usual polished tone, but the voice on the other end was colder than she expected. "Vanessa, we need you to come in right away. And don't go to your office. Straight to conference room B." Her stomach dropped. By the time she walked in, 2 men from corporate compliance were already seated with files spread across the table. The branch director gave her a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We've uncovered some irregularities in several accounts, all tied to your login credentials. Money shifted, signatures mismatched, balances off. It looks bad, Vanessa. Until this is cleared, you're suspended." She froze in her chair, heat flooding her face. "What? That's impossible. I would never." One of the compliance officers slid a folder toward her. "It's all here. Thousands of dollars missing. The trail leads straight back to you." Her mouth went dry. She flipped through the papers, seeing transactions she'd never authorized, but with her login stamped across them like a scarlet letter. This isn't me. Someone's framing me. You have to believe that." But they didn't believe. They didn't even answer. The silence said it all. By afternoon, her badge was deactivated, her desk off limits. She walked out of that bank she once ruled like a queen, stripped of authority, stripped of reputation. For the first time in years, her confidence, the armor she wore so well, cracked wide open. She sat in her car trembling, gripping the steering wheel, replaying every word, every suspicious glance. That evening, Anthony came home to find her pacing the living room like a caged animal. "They think I stole money, Anthony. Me. They're saying I committed fraud." Her voice rose, frantic. "It's not true. You know it's not true. But the files look real. It's like someone planted them." Anthony's face went pale. He sat heavily on the couch, staring at her. "First the clients pulling back from me. Then your promotion blocked. Then that letter from Mom, and now this?" He rubbed his temples, voice low and shaken. "This can't all be coincidence. Somebody's doing this. Somebody's coming for us." Vanessa stopped pacing, her eyes wide, fear cutting through her anger. For the first time, she whispered what neither had dared to say out loud. "Do you think it's her?" The words hung in the room like smoke. Anthony shook his head, trying to convince himself. "No. Mama doesn't know anything about bank systems or lawyers. She couldn't." But his voice trailed off, because deep inside, he remembered the silence of his unanswered calls. He remembered that photo and the verse. He remembered the will that had gutted him, and a chill ran down his spine. Vanessa gripped the back of a chair, her knuckles white. "Someone is out to ruin us, Anthony. And they're not stopping." For once, she wasn't angry. She was scared. And Anthony, staring at her unraveling in front of him, realized he was scared too. The weight of it pressed down heavy. One by one, the pillars of their perfect life were being knocked down. And the ground beneath them was beginning to split. Started with one word. Vanessa was the first to see it. She walked into the hallway one morning and froze, her breath catching in her throat. There, across the eggshell-colored wall just above the baseboard, was a single word written in black marker. Burden. The very same word she had whispered months ago, thinking no one else could hear. Her chest tightened. She called out for Anthony, voice shaking. He came running, and when his eyes landed on the word, all the color drained from his face. Who would do this?" he stammered. They scrubbed the wall until the letters smeared into a dark stain, but the damage wasn't the ink. It was the reminder. That word, that ugly, cutting word, now lived in their house like an accusation neither could escape. Days later, another disturbance surfaced. Anthony came home from work to find the family photos rearranged on the mantel. The portrait of him and Vanessa on their wedding day, once centered, was shoved aside. In its place, framed in the middle where every eye would land, was a photo of him as a boy, sitting on Marilyn's lap, her arms around him, her face glowing with pride. He hadn't pulled that picture out in years. He stood there, his heart hammering in his chest, staring at his mother's smile. A smile that now felt like judgment. At night, the disturbances grew heavier. A drawer left open, though Vanessa swore she closed it. Children's toys placed in odd patterns on the floor, as if someone had crept in and arranged them while the family slept. The television clicked on by itself one evening, buzzing with static before cutting to a home video Anthony had nearly forgotten existed. A Mother's Day breakfast when the kids were toddlers, Marilyn's voice laughing behind the camera as they smeared syrup on pancakes. Vanessa screamed, ripping the DVD from the tray, demanding to know how it got there. Anthony could only stand in silence, dread crawling through his veins. Sleep fled their home. Anthony lay awake most nights, listening to phantom creaks and distant thuds. When he did drift off, dreams came. Dreams of Marilyn standing outside in the rain, clutching her belongings on the porch, her lips forming the word dead weight. He woke soaked in sweat, the echo of her voice lingering like smoke. Vanessa fared no better. Every mirror she passed seemed to betray her with a flicker of Marilyn's reflection over her shoulder. She began jumping at shadows, her nerves stretched so thin even the children's laughter set her teeth on edge. But the cruelest blow came on a Sunday morning. As Anthony gathered the kids for church, Vanessa went to grab her purse from the hall table. Tucked neatly under it was a folded sheet of paper. She opened it with trembling hands and nearly collapsed. Inside was the exact phrase she had hissed behind closed doors. "She's nothing but dead weight." Scrawled in handwriting she didn't recognize. Her knees buckled. Anthony caught her before she hit the floor, the paper trembling between them. He read the words, his throat dry, his mind racing. Whoever was doing this knew their most private shame. They clutched each other in the silence of that hallway, their children watching wide-eyed from the stairs. For the first time, Anthony and Vanessa didn't argue, didn't speak. They just held on, trembling, knowing deep down the walls of their home had turned against them. And in that silence, they both felt it. Marilyn was everywhere. The knock came just after dinner. Firm, deliberate. The kind of knock that makes your stomach drop before you even open the door. Anthony hesitated, hand hovering over the knob, until the sound came again, louder this time. When he finally opened it, 2 uniformed officers stood on the porch, their faces calm but unreadable. "Mr. Johnson?" one asked, flipping open a notepad. "We'd like to ask you and your wife a few questions regarding your mother, Marilyn Johnson." Anthony's pulse thudded in his ears. Vanessa appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on a dish towel, her smile forced. Is there a problem, officers?" The taller officer's expression didn't budge. "Your mother's friend, Mrs. Gloria Anderson, filed a missing person report. She claims a concerned community member reported they couldn't reach your mother and wanted to confirm her welfare, and she's concerned for her welfare too." Vanessa's jaw clenched. Anthony felt his throat tighten. They had expected gossip, whispers, maybe even a few ugly stares, but not this. Not the law at their doorstep. Inside, the officers sat across from the couple at the kitchen table. Their pens scratched steadily over their notepads as the questions began. "When was the last time you saw your mother, Mr. Johnson?" Anthony's mouth went dry. He glanced at Vanessa, who sat stiff beside him, eyes blazing with silent warning. A couple of weeks ago," he muttered. "Where exactly?" He shifted in his chair. "Here. At the house." "And why did she leave?" The silence stretched heavy. Vanessa finally snapped, her voice sharp. "She chose to leave. She wasn't comfortable here anymore." The shorter officer leaned forward. "Mrs. Johnson, Gloria Anderson told us your mother-in-law confided she was being treated like a burden. That she was disrespected. Can you explain that?" Vanessa's face flushed red. "That woman doesn't know what she's talking about." But the officer's eyes stayed fixed on her, cold and steady. Anthony could feel the sweat pooling under his shirt. Every word out of their mouths sounded thin, brittle like paper tearing. Finally, the taller officer pushed a little harder. "Mr. Johnson, is it true you and your wife forced your mother out of this home?" The air in the kitchen turned suffocating. Anthony swallowed hard, fighting to hold his composure. We had disagreements," he admitted. "She left after an argument. That's all." The officer's pen scratched down the words. The sound felt louder than the ticking clock on the wall. When the officers finally rose to leave, they didn't offer comfort. They didn't tell Anthony and Vanessa everything was fine. Instead, they gave a pointed reminder. "If anything happens to your mother while she's unaccounted for, you too could be held responsible. Neglect of an elder, abandonment, serious charges. I suggest you think carefully if there's more you'd like to tell us." The door shut behind them, and the silence that followed was deafening. Anthony slumped against the wall, his face ashen. Vanessa paced the room, fury twisting her features. But beneath her anger was something sharper, something both of them felt pressing against their ribs now. Fear. They hadn't just lost their mother's presence. They had invited the eyes of the law into their home. And with every knock, every question, every whisper in the neighborhood, the walls around them closed in tighter. Anthony couldn't stay in that house another minute after the police left. The walls felt like they were leaning in on him, the word burden still bleeding through fresh paint in his mind. He grabbed his keys and drove without a plan, hands shaking on the wheel, until the church steeple showed up against the evening sky like a place that might still recognize him. The parking lot was mostly empty. Lights glowed behind the office window. Pastor Elijah told me later what Anthony said in that office. Not every word, but enough to know the man finally broke. Pastor Elijah opened the door before Anthony could knock twice. One look at the man on his steps, eyes red, shoulders bowed like they'd been carrying cinder blocks, and the pastor just stepped aside to let him in. They sat in the small office among hymnals and file boxes. The quiet was thick. "I failed my mother," Anthony said, voice low, raw. No preface, no excuses. It rolled out of him like something he'd been choking on for weeks. "I failed her. I let it happen. I stood there and I let it happen." The pastor didn't rush him, didn't pat him with quick church words. He folded his hands and waited. Anthony stared at the floor. She was standing on the porch with her suitcase, and he swallowed hard. "I told myself this was best for my family. I told myself we needed space. Truth is, I was scared of a fight with my wife, scared of neighbors judging the mess inside my own home. Chose easy. I chose quiet." His jaw clenched. I chose wrong. His breath stuttered. I keep calling her. She won't answer. What if she's sick somewhere? What if she fell? What if she's... He couldn't finish it. He covered his face with both hands, shoulders starting to shake. I can't sleep. I close my eyes and I see her in that car alone. I hear my son yelling, "Grandma, are you leaving?" And His voice broke outright. I did that. I put that sound in my child's mouth. Pastor Elijah slid a box of tissues across the desk but said nothing still. Anthony took one, then another. He tried to pull himself together and failed. It's like the whole town knows, he whispered, eyes glassy. At work they look at me like I'm a man who can't be trusted. School drop-off, folks move their kids away. I thought the shame was the punishment, but that ain't it. He shook his head. The punishment is the silence. Her silence. Like God took her voice to show me what I threw away. He let out a bitter laugh that wasn't really a laugh at all. And I hear Vanessa in my head, calling my own mama dead weight. I stood there. I didn't check it. I didn't cover my mother. A real man covers. His fingers dug into his knees. I was a coward in my own house. The pastor finally spoke, slow and careful. Son, truth spoken out loud will break you before it builds you. You're telling the truth now. Anthony nodded, tears slipping anyway. I keep thinking she'll never forgive me. Not this time. I keep seeing the door closing and... That's it. That's what I did. I closed a door on the woman who opened every door I ever walked through. He stared at the old clock on the wall, like it could roll time back for him. If something happened to her, if I have to live the rest of my life knowing my last act as a son was to throw my mother away. He trailed off, breath trembling. I don't know how to carry that. They sat in the hum of the office light. Outside, evening settled. Inside, the air was full of things Anthony had never said to anyone. I keep wanting to fix it fast, he admitted, voice thin. Call, apologize, buy some flowers, say the right words like I can gloss it over. But I know this ain't flowers. This is foundation deep. He pressed his thumb and forefinger to his eyes like he could pinch back the images. I don't deserve her forgiveness. Not after the way she looked at me. Not after I let my home become a place where my mother wasn't safe. Pastor Elijah leaned forward, elbows on the desk. What you feel right now, that weight. That's not meant to bury you, it's meant to turn you. But understand, turning isn't talking, it's changing. Anthony nodded again. A small motion like a man agreeing with a verdict. I hear you. I don't know if I'll get the chance. He stood, then couldn't. He sank back into the chair, face crumpling, the dignified salesman gone, the grown man gone, just a son shaking. Words stumbled out between breaths. God, I was wrong. I was wrong. I was wrong. The pastor came around the desk and put a hand on his shoulder, saying nothing, letting the room hold the confession the way an altar holds a body that can't stand anymore. Anthony stayed like that a long time. Head bowed, eyes swollen, palms open on his knees, guilt finally loud enough to drown out pride. No solutions, no plan, no performance. Just the scrape of a man hitting the bottom of his choices and knowing it. When he finally wiped his face and stood again, he didn't look lighter. He looked honest. And honesty, even when it breaks you, is still the first true step a man takes after lying to himself for too long. He thanked the pastor with a hoarse whisper and walked back into the evening. The steeple didn't look like a rescue anymore. It looked like a witness. He got in his car and sat with both hands on the wheel, not starting it, not ready to face the house, not ready to face the silence. only ready to admit that for the first time in his life, he wasn't the good man he told himself he was. And that truth, heavy, ugly, and undeniable, was the thing that finally broke him. When that next Sunday rolled around, the sanctuary was packed tighter than I'd seen in years. Word had spread, and I knew the anticipation wasn't just about worship. Folks were waiting for a reckoning. Gloria pressed my hand in the parking lot before we walked in. "Sis, hold your head high," she whispered. I nodded, straightened my back, and stepped through those double doors with more strength than I thought I had left. The air shifted the moment people saw me. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Heads turned. I didn't slink in like a beggar. I came in dignified in my best Sunday dress, my Bible tucked under my arm. Not one tear on my face, just calm, steady resolve. You could hear the ripple moving down the pews. "That's Mama Johnson. She back." I caught Anthony's eyes first. "My son." He froze, lips trembling, like the ghost he'd been running from was suddenly flesh and blood again. Vanessa went pale, clutching her purse as if it could shield her from the shame rolling her way. I didn't look away. I wanted them to feel the weight of me standing there, unbroken, in the very place they thought I'd vanish from. When testimony time came, my feet carried me to the front, slow but firm. The hush that fell over the room was thick. I stood at that pulpit and opened my mouth, not to beg, not to accuse with wild anger, but to tell my truth plain. "Church family," I began, my voice steady. "You all know me. You know the years I poured into serving in this house, working in the hospital, raising my son, and loving my grandchildren. But a few weeks ago, the very child I brought into this world, along with his wife, turned me out their home like I was trash." A gasp swept through the crowd. Anthony dropped his head into his hands. Vanessa stared at the floor, shoulders shaking. "Pressed on. They called me a burden. Dead weight. They put my things on the porch while my grandbabies cried out the window." The murmurs rose. I saw the shock, the disappointment burning across faces. I let that truth sit heavy. But God didn't leave me. My sister Gloria took me in, and the Lord gave me strength. And I'm here today not to curse them, but to show y'all what betrayal looks like when it cuts deep, from your own flesh and blood. Anthony broke. Right there, he slid off the pew onto his knees, sobbing uncontrollably, his whole frame shaking. Vanessa, trying to stay composed, couldn't hold it. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she covered her face. The church, silent at first, shifted into prayerful murmurs, some folks crying with me, others shaking their heads at the shame of it all. I didn't gloat. I didn't scream. I simply stood there, every word a mirror they couldn't escape. I gave all I had for my son, and in my old age I was cast aside. Let this be a warning. Honor your mothers and fathers, for the day will come when you'll reap what you sow. The organ swelled soft behind me as Pastor Elijah stepped closer, placing a hand on my shoulder. "Sister Marilyn, thank you," he said, voice thick with emotion. The congregation erupted into amens and cries. But I kept my eyes locked on Anthony and Vanessa, because this was the moment they couldn't hide, couldn't lie, couldn't escape. That day, the truth was laid bare in front of God and everybody. And once you drag sin into the light, it don't ever look the same again. I stood there at that pulpit, looking into my son's broken eyes and his wife's trembling hands. The church was quiet, not a cough, not a shuffle. Every face was waiting for what I would say. My voice didn't shake this time. It carried steady, the way a mother speaks when she's done crying. I told them I had forgiven. Yes, I said those words because forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means I no longer let their betrayal own me. But then I looked them straight in the eye and reminded them that when they dragged me out with my bags, they forgot one thing. My name was still on the deed to that house. If I wanted to, I could have sold it right out from under them. And Lord knows I came close. That truth hit them harder than anything else I said that morning. Anthony's head dropped low, Vanessa's tears turned to sobs, and the congregation stirred. Because everybody there knew, the dead weight they cast aside was the very weight holding their world together. I told them I wasn't after revenge anymore. My peace came from showing them what happens when you dishonor blood that birthed you. I told the young ones in that church, don't ever let money, pride, or your partner's whisper turn you cold toward your mother. Because once she's gone, you can't buy her back. And I reminded the old ones, sometimes you've got to stand tall in your pain, not just for yourself but so the next generation learns respect the hard way. When I walked back to my seat, heads bowed all around. Not out of shame for me but shame for the ones who called me burden. I didn't need applause. I didn't need pity. I needed them, my son, his wife, even my grandbabies, to understand that I may be old but I am not powerless. That day ended with forgiveness, yes, but also with a warning carved deep enough they'll never forget. The house they almost lost, the mother they tried to discard, and the God who saw it all. My story closes here, not with me broken, but with me balanced. Grace in one hand, power in the other. And I left Anthony and Vanessa with a kind of lesson that lingers long after the tears dry.